Mitch McConnell has made very clear that if Harry Reid, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, engages in the use of the nuclear option on judicial nominations, he can expect a very harsh future once the Republicans take control. Now, before we get to the quotes from Mitch McConnell, let's just point out that the only reason Harry Reid, who is by no means a brave man when it comes to the use of efforts like the nuclear option, which I don't even like the title of, but whatever, is because the judicial nominations and non-judicial nominations of the Obama administration are being held up at historic lengths. We have major vacancies that need to be filled, people waiting to be nominated for months, if not years. This is historically crazy when it comes to the judicial nominating process. And so that's what has brought Harry Reid, a man who's like a stone when it comes to wanting to move on things like this. That's the only thing leading to him possibly considering doing it in the future. And so Mitch McConnell feels the need to ward that off. And so here's what he says. He says, there's not a doubt in my mind that if the majority breaks the rules of the Senate to change the rules of the Senate with regard to nominations, the next majority, they're talking about a possible Republican majority, will do it for everything. I wouldn't be able to argue a year and a half from now, if I were the majority leader, to my colleagues that we shouldn't enact our legislative agenda. With a simple 51 votes, having seen what the previous majority just did. I mean, there would be no rational basis for that. From the country's point of view, it's a huge step in the wrong direction. Now look, I don't want us to have to strike down the filibuster, whether on judicial nominations or on everything, as Mitch McConnell is threatening to do. We would not need to if there was any sort of understanding of the history of the Senate among those in the Senate right now. Now, many of you might have seen Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, when a filibuster meant you stood up and you talked for a long time, hours, if not days, the media could cover it, and there might be a political cost to bear for having done so, for stopping the action of the Senate. That's no longer the case. If you know how the filibuster happens now, you don't need to actually stand. There's no cost to doing it, and that's why it's simply exploded exponentially in its use. If you look at the number of filibusters per year, the only thing on a chart that rises as high as that is the parts per million of carbon, thanks to our efforts, our lack of efforts against global warming. And so something does need to be done. But what Mitch McConnell is talking about is not that something. We need to eventually nominate and confirm judicial nominations and non-judicial nominations. And even if the nuclear option in this case was used to finally get some action in that front, the idea that that necessarily means that you have to use it for everything is ridiculous. Now, what's interesting here is that Mitch McConnell probably, in any event, would do this because the Senate is getting a little bit crazier every single year. I'm actually surprised that the last time the Republicans were in control, not that many years ago, they didn't do this. But they showed at least a little bit of restraint under Bush. I guess they should get some props for that. Now, will they do it in the future? I think that that's an open question. I think that there is reason to believe it. Now, the Republican Senate is not as crazy as the Republican House. They would do it in a second. But the Senate might well do it as well. Now, one reason why I think Mitch McConnell is ready to do whatever he can the next time they get in control of the Senate is because of what they're doing or not doing on immigration reform. It might well be the last time they do it. Now, I'm not one of those apocalyptic speakers who say that if immigration reform passes or we have a pathway to citizenship, the Republican Party will cease to exist. But I do think that it will be difficult for them in the future, especially in the near future. They're extremely xenophobic. They're not very good at hiding it anymore. We actually have a story about that coming up later in the show. And so I think that it could hurt them. Now, I don't want the nuclear option to be used. I hope that it's not necessary. I hope that the Republicans will back off and actually give a fair up and down vote to some of these judicial and non-judicial nominees. At this point, we don't know if that's going to happen, though. And if nothing else, the possibility that in the future the Senate business could be voted up or down to 51, just a simple majority vote, that is interesting as a pundit, and I guess we'll just have to wait and see.